That's what we've been doing as an alliance of doctors and scientists and practitioners and citizens, educating people and also changing our perception of the world around us, our position in that world. We are entirely codependent on the natural environment. And we spend much of our lives walking around and concrete in our motor cars, separated from the earth with rubber tires, inhaling processed air, eating processed foods. And it is that separation, increasing separation from nature, that is making us sicker and sicker. So the United States of America, one of the greatest superpowers on the planet, now sits 80th in the global rankings of health-adjusted life years, healthy life expectancy. If you want a marker of how healthy a national population is, look at that statistic. It's more important than longevity. And what's happened in many parts of the world now is that human beings spend the latter 1/3 of their life with one or more diseases in a morbid or comorbid state. That is an option that we don't have to choose. And we cannot wait for governments to solve this problem, because the problem exists within ourselves, within our families, within our communities. It is about behavior and about behavior change. And we have become addicts for certain kinds of food. We can see that there is a close relationship now between our addiction to ultra-processed foods and our addiction to digital devices. And if we see the current trajectory of healthy life expectancy and imagine and project what is going to happen with the young people today who are growing up. If you look at the most recent figures from the NDNS studies in the UK or NHANES in the United States, young people today are eating more packeted snack foods. They're getting more calories from that than they are in main meals. People are not sitting down at dining room tables eating together. When we look at the benefits of the Mediterranean diet, we always think, well, is it the olive oil? Is it the fresh fruit and vegetable they're eating? And we forget the complexity of this relationship we have with our food. And in fact, there's a lot of work showing that a big part of it is how they eat. So they will take 1 to 2 hours to eat a meal. They will sit in a convivial, social environment, sometimes with music, often in a nice environment, with laughter, moving themselves into a parasympathetic state of the autonomic nervous system. So you all know about fight and flight. That is the sympathetic state. But the rest and digest part, we don't use the term rest and digest. The parasympathetic state is essential to be in when we're eating. So if you are desktop dining or dashboard dining or walking down the Strand dining or whatever people do today, you cannot extract the nutrients from your food. And the best thing you can do, I was teaching a group of young college students quite recently about health. I was asked to say, these kids are eating crap food, they're getting sick, they're all coming down with pneumonia and various lung infections. What can be done? And I looked at this example of what do you do, guys, when you finish the whole day of rehearsals and you see a gas station, you see a petrol station. What are you going to eat in the petrol station? And they, I talked to them about some of the basics of nutrition beforehand. They said, oh, we can't eat the crisps, and we can't eat the chocolate bars, and oh, we can't eat those sausage rolls, and maybe a packet of nuts. Great. So they came up with a few healthy options, but none of them said we could avoid eating until we get home. Because what we can do then is actually give our guts more of a break. And if you're moving into metabolic disease, you are not going to be triggering the process that has become dormant in many, many people, which is this ability to burn fat. And you can only burn fat when you start excluding carbohydrates. So Carbs, low carb, ketogenic, are you all over that? Are you all, hands up who supports a low carb diet here? Okay, one, yep. So carbohydrates are great things, we can't do without them, but they are one of 4 basic fuel sources that we need. And so we have carbs, we have fats, and we have proteins. They are hugely variable. Different proteins from different meats, from different fish and from different animals, depending on how you cook them, communicate with the body in a completely different way. So you can have, there's been some fantastic work by Professor Cacabelos in northern Spain, who is one of the most published researchers in the field of Alzheimer's research, who's shown that if you eat herrings versus sardines, you can have a different reaction. And in fact, the sardines can be about the very best fish that we can use if we're going to reduce the rate of neurodegeneration, which is a big problem we face in our society. But the problem is, as the Japanese discovered, if you stop cooking your meats, you don't denature them, and these native proteins talk to the body in a completely different way from the cooked ones. So again, I come back to this idea of how we are eating. If we crucify our foods in frying pans, microwave ovens, and air fryers, my new target, handle them with care. I mean, I just dropped my 5th child. I've got 6 children and 5 grandchildren. So dropped my 5th child at university at Aberystwyth just over the weekend, and nearly every kid that my child is sharing the kitchen with has their own air fryer, and that is the modern form of cooking. Now, think what happens if you bring all the food you're cooking up to 200 degrees centigrade. You denature those foods. You start oxidizing the fats. So we got a bad message that was not scientifically based for around about 40 years telling us that fats are bad. There was a complete misunderstanding of the cholesterol hypothesis. There was a huge difference between consuming cholesterols and the cholesterol that our bodies produce naturally. That's the parent of all our steroid hormones. We cannot do without them. So in terms of proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, they're all good if you get the right combination, and it's all down to profiles, and we've got to look after them and not break them down. So low carb should be, we only think about low carb, which from most determinations, depends on your definition, we think of low carb anything where the total intake of energy, that is calories, from carbohydrates is less than 40% of the overall diet. A true ketogenic diet, you bring that all the way down to 5%. And some of you, have you heard about carnivore diets? Carnivore diets where you're eating only meat. Now, what I would say, based on the totality of available scientific evidence, is neither a ketogenic diet or, an extremely heavily carbohydrate restricted diet is good in the long term if you exclude plant foods. Okay, any diet long term that is deficient in a diversity of plant foods will yield problems. Why? Because of that pink sausage out there. The absolute requirement for the gut microbiome, we have around about 10 times more good bacteria in a healthy adult gut than we have human cells. In fact, most of the estimates have come down a little bit. It's at least 2 times, but it's between 2 times and 10 times. We are less human than we are bug, okay? But the critical things that those bugs need to be able to operate is fiber. Soluble and insoluble fiber, as well as polyphenols. And polyphenols only come from plant foods. Yes, you can get them in your red wine, like they do in France, but there's such a huge diversity of polyphenols out there. The only way we can really get healthy and start to bring in all these antioxidants that talk to different systems is by having a diversity of nutrients. So this idea that's now been well established by the American Gut Project to try and consume each week 30 different plant foods, 30 different plant foods. So going to the supermarket, choosing the same foods week in, week out, having a rota of your menus, not so good. I mean, I'm a very passionate and keen cook, and I think we need to change. As I get older, I think I'm moving towards turning some of the ideas I've been using in cookery into a book. So, but we have much of that in our. We have a book called Reset Eating that's just, Melissa, it's going to be out next week again, isn't it? In its second printing, so we're out of stock. Please pick up our information here. The Food and You, Melissa, if you can show people where that is, please pick one of these up. You've got some of the basics in there of how, when to eat. Please don't ignore the back page because there's a lot of information in there. But that is really critical. So I want to just take you through some of the main sort of concepts. The diversity, 30 plants a week is your starting point. You can choose to not eat meats. Let's just have a brief discussion on animal versus plant foods. There is no doubt scientifically, from my perspective, that human beings are omnivores. One of the reasons that meat has been targeted so badly in some of the science and particularly the media is because we eat the wrong kind of meats that are industrially produced, and then we cook them in the wrong way, and we produce a whole bunch of chemicals on them, like polyaromatic hydrocarbons, that are essentially carcinogenic because we overcook them. As soon as you start creating brown crispy bits that we all love so much and start carbonizing your food, you create toxins that can give you cancer. If we eat preserved meats as well, we create a lot of problems. So if you look at the ingredients and you see sodium nitrite and potassium nitrite, stay away, because a traditional cured meat is air cured. It doesn't need to have sodium nitrite. This is what's happened with industrial food production. And also looking at the source of the meats, imagine this small number of species, you know, cattle and sheep and goats, that have given themselves up to be domesticated. So we eat very few, and pigs, of course, let's not forget pigs. But they've given themselves up to be domesticated, but they're produced in vast numbers in ways that are, and they're forced to eat foods that are not part of their native diets. So if you can eat naturally reared, outdoor reared animals in a less intensive farm production system that is labeled now, I would argue that regenerative farming is the solution that we're all looking for. Organic farming is very difficult to scale so that the people who need to eat the healthiest food most, which is the most disadvantaged population, can get it. So organic isn't going to get mainstream to the most impoverished communities in the next 5 years. It's not going to happen. I've been working on this for 40 years. But regen ag food can do that. So this is where you decide to treat the soil as the basis of everything in agriculture. You respect that soil. You don't deep plow and let it be. I've just come back through Italy and France and still seen some of this deep plowing going on. It's just sitting there in the sunshine, burning up all the rhizosphere, all the bugs that are the exact replicas of the bugs in our gut. We've got to think of the soil and the microbes in the soil as being replicas of the bacteria and the gut for human beings. If we look after both, we look after human health and the natural environment. So Regen Ag does use some chemicals in certain uses, very judicious use, on the condition that it doesn't damage the environment. And what it does is allow the land to rest, so you have fallow periods so it can recover, just in the way that you might choose to not have breakfast so you can extend your overnight fasting interval, say, to 18 hours. For many of us, I started doing that I think 14, 15 years ago, when I had, in my 40s, suddenly started gaining huge amounts of weight. I was eating healthy food, but suddenly the weight was just piling on, and I realized what was going on. It wasn't what I was eating, it was when I was eating. And I then did my genetics, and I have all the worst possible genetics to get obese. I have many members of my family who are morbidly obese, so to become obese, develop type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, and the rest. So I have to work quite hard at it. But I've also got to work on building my mitochondria. So if we don't have mitochondrial health, mitochondria are the organelles in our cells that produce energy for us. If you don't have enough energy in your body, you cannot heal properly. Your immune system can't work. As the big plastic tube there tells us, 70% of all the immune activity in the body goes on in the gut. And what happens if we start eating the wrong foods and we don't have enough energy in the system, and we expose ourselves to environmental triggers like pesticides, we risk going down the autoimmune continuum. And we now have an epidemic of people with the up to 80 to 100 different autoimmune diseases out there. Celiac disease just being one. So we've got foods that are staple foods like gluten or gluten-containing grains, and we've got dairy as two of the major allergens that most of us are eating all the time, stressing our body. We should not feel any discomfort when we eat. And a lot of people have got used to this idea that, oh, I eat and I feel bloated, and I'll go and take a couple of Gaviscon. That is a rocky old road that will take you into comorbidities, without doubt. You can go to our website and read all about the problems with proton pump inhibitors, for example. A major, major problem out there. So GPs are prescribing them like Smarties without looking at the underlying reasons why people's gut health is so out of alignment. So we need to chew 30 times each mouthful in order to be able to get the sequence of events that are required to allow chemical digestion or mechanical destruction of foods and then chemical digestion, with all the pancreatic and bile enzymes being released at the right time in the right sequence. And we need to be in the right environment with our autonomic nervous system in parasympathetic mode if we're going to stand a chance of extracting this food. We've got to get away from processed foods. We've got to start thinking about the proteins, the carbohydrates, and the fats. It is a very good idea to restrict your carbohydrate intake. So people who are putting on more weight should probably think about excluding all simple starchy carbohydrates. And yet the Eat Well plate produced by the British government tells us that 50% of our diet should come from it. There is no really good science. If we simply remove those starchy carbs, and I'm talking about the potatoes, any below ground carbohydrate stores, so starchy carbs like potatoes, even sweet potatoes. If we remove those, we also remove the rice, we remove the bread, we remove the pasta, and we substitute them for a diversity of vegetables. We often think of fruits and vegetables as one group. They're completely different beings. Fruits have a lot of sugar in them, and they have much more sugar today than they had in the days of our grandparents. So they've been bred to increase the sugar. A jazz apple can be 15-16% sugar. Okay? So we choose the Granny Smith over the jazz apple to get less sugar in it. If we think about fats, let's think about getting healthy fats in the diet. Fats are also lambasted because if you put them in a bomb calorimeter in the laboratory, they produce a lot of energy. So for each gram, you get 4 calories out of proteins and carbohydrates. You get 9 calories out of fat. So all the calories are coming from the fats. But the thing is, if you have more of those kind of calories and they're the right fats, so they're a good quality, unrefined, unprocessed extra virgin olive oil, they're an organic, so you can eat certain organic ingredients. I would eat an organic coconut oil. If I'm cooking Asian food, that's what I'll use as my base oil. So what you want to do is try and get away from these highly refined and processed mixed vegetable oils that are extremely rich in omega-6 fatty acids, because omega-6, omega-3 fatty acid balance has gone completely out, which pushes us towards inflammation. So most people in the Western world suffer from persistent low-grade inflammation. So, so that's your your carbs. You want complex carbs, and you really want to make sure you have a mixture of soluble and insoluble fibers. So the fibers, if they're fibers, they can be carbohydrate, but they're not digestible carbohydrate. So when we eat celery, for example, you're putting a lot of undigestible carbohydrate that your gut bugs are going to use. If you eat an apple, like a Granny Smith, very rich in pectin, and pectin feeds those gut bugs. For some people that can be hard on the digestive system, so you can get a cooking apple, a Bramley cooking apple, and you can stew them, and you have 3 tablespoons of stewed apple with a bit of cinnamon in it, maybe a little bit of maple syrup if you feel the need for some sugar, but I would say avoid it if you can, and have 3 tablespoons after your meal instead of a dessert. You are doing your body a real favor. So this concept of having a main meal followed by a dessert actually has some scientific basis, but we tend to put in the wrong kind of desserts these days. So a stewed fruit rich in pectin can be a really good idea. You can keep it in the fridge, keep it for 3 or 4 days. Eating fermented foods does wonders for your guts. So you might eat a kefir. You can actually have a kefir that's made from non-dairy sources as well, if you're dairy sensitive. Very easy to determine if you're lactose intolerant or not. Do you drink a glass of milk and feel unwell afterwards and become quite flatulent? Certain genetic types, I'm Dutch, the Dutch tend to consume a lot of dairy, but I'm lactose intolerant. But 97% of Japanese people, many Asian people, are naturally lactose intolerant. It is a more advanced state of being. We weren't meant to be consuming milk from cows into adulthood. So we all produce lactase, the enzyme that breaks down lactose, when we're very young. And as we're weaned, we're meant to lose that ability. But of course we've now adapted to selecting for people who are still producing lactose because we're consuming so much dairy. So for many people, if you feel any sense of stress, or discomfort, I would take dairy out of the diet. So Food for Health way of eating, many of the concepts that are talked about are in there. They're explained in much more depth in our book, Reset Eating. But you'll see essentially a plate where half of it is a diverse range of vegetables. You're consuming 6 different phytonutrient colors, so you get eating a rainbow every day. You're being very careful about the fats that you add, and your food preparation is pretty top of the list in terms of trying not to denature the food. That doesn't mean you're always eating raw food. You're sometimes cooking foods, but you're cooking foods gently and slowly, so you're not degrading nutrients. So I think I've come to the end of my talk. Please make sure you leave here with some of the information. We've got a huge amount of information. Yes. Oh, we got questions, of course. Oh God, I love questions. Yes. So we got question time. So please help yourself to the materials. As I said, Melissa here will be able to take names and addresses if you're interested in getting our Reset book, a Reset Eating book, which is really how you reset your metabolic system through how, when, and what you eat. Okay. So because many of us have our metabolic system is completely out of whack. So I would love to take some questions. Thank you.
Hey, do we have
Yes, please.
Do you want the microphone
Yes.
back? I don't know.
I'm sure we will.
We might be able to hear you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that. I'm a type 2 diabetic, and so I'm very clued into the need to improve my gut microbiome.
Yep.
But I suppose my question is, there's a lot of talk now about personalized diet, so you have to test your microbiome and gut health and la la la. And I know that there are tests out there that are really quite expensive.
Yep.
So how does one if one wants to really address metabolic diseases like mine, etc., and improve our gut health, but where can we get the testing done, etc.?
Yeah, so I think we're still early in that journey. So it's all about the metabolome. So understanding the relationship with the communities of gut bugs that you have, and how that responds to your metabolic system, your metabolic profile, which is also linked to the way in which your genes are expressed. So the reason why I think we're at an early stage, yes, you can go out and get your gut communities worked out. That's a fairly simple job now that we can use, rapid PCR systems to be able to understand exactly what the genes are for individual species in your gut. However, the relationship between the communities of gut bugs and your metabolome, we're at an early stage of understanding that. And the reason for that is that you can also study your own genetics, and I've done that with myself, and that's why I know I'm very prone towards metabolic diseases. The difference is that, and Tim Spector really has been at the forefront of some of this work because of his background, and this was what drew him into this, is because of his background with twin studies. And so when you look at a pair of twins that are monozygotic, that have had different environments, the way in which their genes express is very, very different. And so, yes, that does raise the issue of personalization. But where a lot of clinical nutritionists are at is that one of the most profound things any of us can do is to be able to understand how we feel. So that there have been many studies that show, they have all sorts of questionnaires that look at quality of life and health outcomes. But the simple notion of how you feel after you eat certain foods may be one of the most powerful things that you can do to change how you eat. And it may give you a more advanced view of an approach that is personalized to you, because how you feel will incorporate your epigenetics. And for those of you who don't understand exactly what I mean, is that essentially epigenetics comes from the epi above genetics, your genetic code. Your code is what you're born with, but as we live, we experience our environment in very different ways, and that leaves a signature, an epigenetic signature through methylation, histone modification, different molecular processes that change the way our genes are expressed. And that's much more important than the code that we come in. So, yes, I think it's a really interesting thing to do, but we've also seen that, people who have metabolic disease, who are carrying a lot of weight, will have certain communities of bacteria in their gut that others won't have. Does it mean they need to change their gut according to their diet according to the gut bugs? Possibly, but it may mean that they need to find a better way of turning on their beta oxidation of fatty acids in their liver. So what is their liver health like? So yes, I think we're at a very early stage of understanding that, but go to Zoe in the UK, they're doing some of the most advanced work in this field, but I still think you're better off trying to find a dietary plan that takes into account essentially the kind of approach that we're talking about, that you'll see that some basic principles around diversity, around color, around fiber, around carbohydrates, protein and carb profiles that allow you to leave the table feeling good. If you have any digestive discomfort after a meal, something's not right. If you lose energy, one of the most common complaints that GPs face is people suffering loss of energy, lack of energy, tired all the time, tapped. And that's because the mitochondrial health is not being dealt with. So yes, I think early stages, getting lots of colour into your diet, and the fibre is the food that your gut microbiome need. Trying to take processed foods out of your diet as much as possible, also absolutely key. Yeah, and resting your gut sufficiently, particularly overnight. Yeah.
For how long? For how long?
You know, for people who've eaten breakfast all their lives, start by doing it very slowly. So if you're eating breakfast, delay your breakfast and perhaps have so if you're used to having breakfast at 7 in the morning, maybe try and have a healthy, small breakfast, maybe snack, at say 9 o'clock. But for most of us, particularly if we're carrying too much weight, actually a 16 to 18 hour fast and eating 2 main meals a day and taking snacking out of the equation altogether is a great way forward. Snacking is one of the biggest problems we have in society. People just eat snacks all the time.
What's the best?
If you do snack, are you saying snacking between meals? One of our principles, yeah, one of our principles is that try and keep at least 5 hours between eating intervals, which includes snacks. Okay, so you may, but if you're going to have snack, allow it to be a healthy snack. If you eat, I mean, if you eat meat and plant foods, a version of a healthy snack that you can have would be, say, eating a dried meat such as biltong together with a mixture of mixed nuts, so which gives you your protein and fats and no carbohydrates. So if you want to stay in a keto state where you're still in ketosis and burning fats, you've just had some food that's given you no carbohydrates at all, is not heavily processed at all, it's nuts and it's air-cured meat. So that's an example. Don't eat the salami, don't eat the chips and all the rest of it that people are eating all the time, and certainly don't go for the chocolate bar.
Is there any other questions?
Yes. Yes, so we've got specifically on our Food for Health plate, you'll see a Food for Kids plate. After weaning, moving them into a mode where they are eating healthy foods, diversity of vegetables, really, really critical. Trying to get them used to the full diversity of flavors. I'm a big supporter of the idea of taking a lime to a little toddler and saying, have a taste on this. Get an olive, a Kalamata olive, which has a high hydroxytyrosol content, the stuff that's really good in olive oil, and get them used to those flavors. If they're very young and they're exposed to these bitterness and sour, sweet, salty, all the different flavor types, they're going to have a broader palate. One of the difficulties we have is these kids grow up in McDonald's and have a very narrow palate. They come across a different food or a new plant. As Jamie Oliver found, he found kids who didn't know what an aubergine was, an eggplant was, and people who don't know what a courgette is. They probably haven't eaten a courgette flower. I mean, all this food that goes to waste because we don't know what to do with it. In the animal side, there's a big revolution now in nose-to-tail eating, where you eat all parts of the animal. The fact that the offal, since the BSE crisis has come, has been taken out of the equation, creating a huge problem. So there's all sorts of compounds that we no longer eat, such as nucleotides, that are primary there in offal foods that are no longer part of the diet. So we eat these very carefully manicured muscle meats that really miss out a whole bunch of nutrients that we need. So getting kids into diversity, also engaging them in the food selection and food preparation, and I use the word food preparation rather than cooking because it doesn't always involve cooking. Process as young as possible is really key, and guaranteed they'll have the best social life when they get to uni because they'll be the only people who can cook. This is what I found with my kids. Yes?
You're against carb starch. Does that include resistant starch?
No, so I'm a big fan of resistant starch. So this is, can I say, this is one of the biggest problems in Asia at the moment, particularly in Southeast Asia, is if you look traditionally, I spent a lot of time in Indonesia and Malaysia when I was working with Imperial College, and it was at a time when the electric rice cooker was coming in. And I was thinking, why are we seeing so much obesity now and we didn't see it even 10 years ago? And the big change there is that the rice that was cooked and boiled in the morning, that was then left to cool. So the Okinawans, with their, blue zone, they're eating, 85% of their diet is carbohydrate. But they cook it up in the morning and let it go cold. In Asia, many parts of Asia, you boil the rice, you let it go cold, you throw it in the wok or you eat it tepid at room temperature. It turns to resistant starch. Resistant starch also great for those gut bugs. If we leave it in a rice cooker, doesn't cool down, doesn't turn to resistant starch, and is immediately converted to blood sugar. Problem. And we move people, and that's why we see such rapid growth. So the electric rice cooker is a big problem. So we'll target that one as well as the air fryer. Okay?
Cool rice, freeze it as you made yourself.
Yep.
And then use it.
Yep.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that again, if you bring it up to full heat, you will partially reconvert back to a digestible starch, not a resistant starch. So one of the keys, so this idea of having rice that's cooked and that is tepid at room temperature, through a lot of Southeast Asia, that's what they used to do. The rice is always just room temperature, and then you might have some hot dishes around it. Another little trick is when you're making food, I always use the rule of 4. I never make a meal without at least 4 different dishes. You cannot, this idea of having, because if you take your starchy carbs out of the equation, you're only left with, meat and veg, and that's 2 dishes. It doesn't give you enough diversity. So you use this idea of having 4 different things that you're making. It doesn't need to be huge quantities. We can also eat out of small plates. That's what we do at home. It made a huge difference. Don't have a huge plate. Have a small plate. So people can go for seconds if they need to. But there's so many different ways of approaching this. But yes, room temperature carbs, and the same with sweet potatoes or and potatoes. So if you're using potatoes, a potato salad, patatas insalatas, a Turkish potato salad made with sumac, and amazing because it's all resistant starch. Yes, are we okay with questions?
One more
yes,
question.
one more.
We're paranoid now about leaving rice out because it's dangerous. So the minute the rice is cooked and eaten, it's then chucked. We don't do what they used to do in Asia, which is keep it.
No, but you know what they did? They always ate it the same day. So you're absolutely right that cooked rice is like an agar plate in a laboratory. So we get this massive aerial plankton. All around us right now is an aerial plankton full of bugs. Most of them are good. Most of them are good for us. Some of them are bad. But the bad ones will colonize. And yes, so rice...
So you put it in the fridge?
If you put it in the fridge, don't ever go more than 3 days. I would say 2 days. But ideally, try and eat it the same day. Yeah.
What about if you're reheating it in the microwave all the way?
That's a whole nother can of worms. But the microwave creates a resonance in the food that is new to nature. So if you look at the vibratory state, so all molecules vibrate, they resonate. We can measure the frequency of all chemicals. And again, we've lived in a world where we're sort of led by chemistry and molecular science and genetics, and we forget about the things that we're learning about now. And of course, everything ultimately is energy. And so we've got to think of the biophysics of the food we're eating as well. And so when you look at a microwave, it creates a movement, vibration in a single plane. Our bodies don't know what that is. And so there have been some suggestions, there haven't been comprehensive studies that have conclusively shown this, that microwave foods may be a problem. But as we've understood more about the biophysics, that is a potential mechanism of why microwave foods are not so good. Also, if you use Kirlian photography or GDV, any of the systems like that that are able to look at the energetic signature of foods, what we can see is that it removes the life force of those foods. And you know, slow cooking doesn't do that. You know, yes, we're on the bridge of emerging science, but for that reason I'm not a fan. Many of the things that are problematic relate to things that we're not well adapted to. So some of these plant chemicals that we're saying, eat lots of them, they're all toxic. But that toxicity, it's a concept called hormesis in science, is what is good for us. It subjects us to what we call adaptive stress. So the curcuminoids in your turmeric root are toxic to the body, but in small quantities they create an adaptive stress reaction that creates the supercompensation mechanism that allows us to develop resilience.